And can I begin by welcoming members to the committee this morning? Could I provide a brief overview of the day's business? The committee today will consider subordinate legislation, a briefing from Drains for Development on water and wastewater infrastructure in Northern Ireland. Could I advise members joining online of the need to use the hand up icon in order to register for questions at each agenda item? Also, if members would keep their mics on mute in between sessions so that members can follow the meeting in a good way. Also, members, just that the room has to be vacated by 1 p.m. at the latest, and I request that you keep that in mind when answering questions. Apologies, I have one, Andrew Muir. Nobody else has apologies. Okay. Agenda item number 2, which is chairperson's business. Members, could I advise that the Department's decision not to brief the committee on taxi legislation on legal advice after the introduction of a judicial review in the matter? In correspondence at page 57, the Minister advises that the Department will now consult with its legal advisers, and its response in light of this, we will need to defer our provision of answers to the written questions raised and our briefing session with the committee. While we appreciate the offer of a closed committee hearing, unfortunately a closed hearing is still a matter of public record and not without prejudice, and could not proceed in a manner that would be informative for members at this time. Members, could I just say that I'm extremely disappointed in this. I do believe that this is in some form of a cop-out from the Department. Again, we are the scrutiny body of this Department, and this is a public policy of the Department, and it's certainly something that's been on the agenda for quite a considerable time. I know that the members on the last time that we met to discuss this issue, we were unanimous in our view as to what was going on, and that should have had questions followed up from the Department. We haven't had those answered. We have an industry that is literally in dire need of support, and support quick. So, members, I'm in your hands. I gather members probably feel as aggrieved on this issue as I do, but I'll go to members for questions. I see David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. It's not so much a question as such, but maybe a potential proposal that the committee this morning agree collectively to get in touch with the Department urgently and urge them to grant the temporary exemption certificates and allow the review of the taxi legislation to deal with the issue.
Yeah, I think that might be a good way to go about this, because obviously, if there is a review of the Tax Act, which this committee support, there's obviously a need to review that legislation, but that could be quite a considerable time away, and this industry needs help now. So if that is a proposal from the Vice Chair, again, I would support that this committee support a position whereby we call on the Department very clearly to grant temporary exemption certificates to those within the wedding, car and funeral directors until such times as the Taxi Act is reviewed and this issue can be addressed more substantively. I see Cathal Boyne.
Yeah, Chair, I would support that. I think that's a reasonable course of action given the timeframes and what you said, so I'll be happy enough to support that.
Okay. Roy?
I would fully support it as well. I think to do nothing, there will be practical problems arising with those requiring wedding and funeral cars. I understand there already is major difficulties, and that will be worsening, so I would fully support the suggestion of the Deputy Chair.
Well, I'm seeing unanimous support there, and I think included in that letter of correspondence, in the strongest possible terms, we have to let the Department know our displeasure of how this issue has been handled, and again, in the strongest possible terms, that this committee has identified an interim solution which will help the industry until such times as that wider review, and that we will see where they come back on that. But I think that's a good point to start with. Are members content with that course of action? It will also be on record as to this committee's position on this issue, given that this will be the wider Taxi Act will be reviewed in the next mandate. But I think it's important that there is absolutely no ambiguity as to where this committee stands on the issue. Members content?
Content, Chair.
Thank you, members. You'll also see at page 3, members, that I, as Chair, have received a correspondence from an individual regarding a decision dating back some time ago with Craigavon Borough Council. The request is that they be furnished with the minutes of a particular meeting which is included within the correspondence and the attendees with the Department. Are members content that we forward that on to the Department and call for the access of those minutes and those attendees?
Great.
Thanks, members. Agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes of the meeting on the 23rd of February 2022. Are members content with the minutes and then they are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting? Content?
Agreed.
Great, thank you, members. Agenda item number 4, which is matters arising. At page 17, matters arising from the meeting on the 23rd of February 2022. Could I ask members if they have any issues arising from the meeting? David?
Chair, just in relation to the issue which took place in private, have the committee then responded to the gentleman who raised the issue on entrapment as to how things progressed, or does he receive any information or feedback from that meeting? And apologies, obviously I wasn't able to get it also. I don't even know myself what was discussed.
Okay.
So,
No, fair point, and I think firstly, the officials did agree to meet personally with yourself, David, on the issue. I don't know if that's been arranged yet, but certainly there was the willingness to do that and the commitment. Secondly, obviously I have to be careful as to what was discussed in closed session.
Yes, appreciate that.
But I will defer to the clerk to maybe give us a position as to what we can say. I don't think we have communicated with the individual whose case we were discussing in closed session, but given that it was in closed session, what can we say or correspond with that individual?
Chair, I think we are very, very limited in what the committee can say, given it's an individual case, and I think it was agreed that the committee would meet with Mr. Hilditch in person, wasn't that the...
Yeah.
Just to,
I was just asking, that's all.
Yeah. So I think probably the way it was left with the committee was that on the individual case, they would engage directly with yourself. Following that, we did have an open, well, we didn't have, sorry, it was all in closed session, but we did have wider, I think it's fair enough to say, we did have wider discussion about our concerns surrounding the wider entrapment issue, of which officials assured us that certain entrapment, I'm trying to be very careful in my wording, but certainly some of the issues that had been raised regarding entrapment cases that we had heard as a committee and which would certainly be public interest, the department reassured this committee that that would not be their approach. So that was assurances that were given to the committee. But as in relation to the individual case, I think it's best that you meet personally with them to discuss that and then
We don't.
think of a way forward from there.
Okay.
Okay, members, is there any other matters arising from the minute on the 23rd? I don't have any. Okay. Page 19, outstanding committee requests for information. Members have no points to raise. Correspondence at agenda item number 5. Can I draw members' attention to agenda item and correspondence memo on page 31? Members content with the actions as suggested? You will see agenda item 5.7, which is a response to issues arising from the committee meeting on the 9th of February 22. Does any member have any issue they want to raise from that? Not seeing any. I do see we have the Northern Ireland Audit Office report in planning in Northern Ireland, and again, this is something that members continue to highlight and press upon. Sadly, the case, I think many of us believe that the review hasn't went far enough, given the comments that were made. We'll see the future agricultural policy engagement with DAERA. Members content with the...
Chair, just on the DAERA point, because it is going to be an important issue, and I know I raised it the other day in the chamber, and the Speaker sort of referred it to a different minister, but it's going to have an impact on planning, there's no doubt in it.
Okay.
I appreciate that being on the agenda, yeah.
Okay, members, thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item number 6, which is subordinate legislation, SL1s not subject to Assembly proceedings. Could I advise members that there are 3 proposals for statutory rules not subject to Assembly proceedings at page 60. SL1, the parking places on roads, Castle Place, Belfast Order, Northern Ireland 2022. SL1, the road races, Croft Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2022. SL1, the private access is on the A6 Castle Dawson Bypass, Stopping Up Order, Northern Ireland 22. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rules?
Content.
Content. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to agenda item number 7, which is subordinate legislation SRs not subject to Assembly proceedings. Can I advise members that there is 1 proposal for a statutory rule not subject to Assembly proceedings at page 73. SR 2022-58, the Clearway Moneymore Road, Cookstown Order, Northern Ireland 2022. There have been no changes to the policy content since the ASL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content to note the statutory rule? Content. Agenda item number 8, which is Darren Nazar Road, Rubble Road, Omagh, Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022. Members can see that SL1 at page 79. The proposal is subject to negative resolution procedure. The rule will abandon a length of Darren Nazar Road, Omagh, extending from its southern junction with Deuce Road. I'm laughing at some of these terminology. You can tell I'm not from Tyrone. No. The department has carried out a statutory consultation and there have been no objections. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content. Members, agenda item number 9, which is the SL1, the Railway Safety Amendment, or Management Amendment, EU Exit Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. Members, I'm going to defer this item given that we have outstanding information that has not come forward from the department at this stage. Members content? Okay. Agenda item number 10, which is SR 2022-60, the Narrow Water Bridge Order, Northern Ireland 2022. At page 117 is the statutory rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 16th of February 2022 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Okay, members, the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2022-60, the Narrow Water Bridge Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objections to the rule.
Great.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to agenda item number 11, which is SR 2020-61, the Newry River, diversion of navigable watercourse and extinguishment of public rights of navigation order, Northern Ireland 2022. Members can see that statutory rule at page 145. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 16th of February 2022 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Content. Okay, members, the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2022-61, the Newry River, diversion of the navigable watercourse and extinguishment of public rights of navigation order, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agenda item number 12, which is SR 2020-64, the Foreglen Road, Dungiven, Abandonment Order 2022. At page 178, Statutory Rule. The committee considered the proposal for the statutory rule on the 23rd of February 2022 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Content. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2022-64, the Foreglen Road, Dungiven Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Okay, members, we're now moving on to our only briefing for today, which is the briefing from Drains for Development, Water and Wastewater Infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and we will wait for attendees to come into the room, and we're at page 186, members. Yep, please. Morning, yeah. Okay, I'll give you a bit of time to get settled, but can I begin by welcoming attending in person today Mr. James Fraser, Fraser Homes Northern Ireland Limited, Joe McGuinness, Braidwater Properties, and Maureen O'Reilly, Economist. You're all very welcome. Obviously, the committee received the correspondence from Drains for Development, and we're certainly given the context of what the committee has been discussing on a wider basis regarding the planning system in Northern Ireland. We thought it was timely to hear from your organisation as to the problems that you have faced in Northern Ireland, particularly with, I think it's, well, primarily with NI Water, but also in wider infrastructure related issues relating to the planning process. So I would like to just hand over to yourselves. I think it's Maureen leading off with a presentation which will follow by questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to just present some remarks in terms of the work that I've been doing with the Drains for Development Group. So I'm here as in my capacity as an independent economist, working with the group to try and understand the impact of the underinvestment in water and wastewater infrastructure on the Northern Ireland economy. Just by way of background, Drains for Development is an alliance of many of Northern Ireland's home builders who've come together as a campaign group dedicated to raising awareness of the water and wastewater infrastructure crisis that Northern Ireland is facing. It represents some of the largest residential developers in Northern Ireland who together have invested hundreds of millions in construction activity across the local economy in recent years. And that's around £500 million in 2019-20 alone, providing around 700 direct jobs and further supporting hundreds of subcontractors throughout the Northern economy and the wider supply chain as well. Members include Antrim Construction, Braidwater, Dixon Contractors, Fraser Homes, Fraser Houses NI Limited, Hagan Homes, Hillmark Limited, Lagan Homes, Lotus Homes UK, MRP Investment and Development Limited, Port Bannis Limited, Porter Homes, Rosemount Homes, Carryduff Limited and South Bank Square. Strand Homes also. The Drains for Development Group is of the view that the water and wastewater infrastructure in Northern Ireland is not fit for purpose and are not alone in this view. You will have read from the recently published investment strategy for Northern Ireland that in terms of it makes stark reading around the issues at hand. It identifies the historic underinvestment in water and wastewater infrastructure, meaning significant deficiencies now exist, and notes this is already acting as a brake on the planned development of new homes and businesses that are needed here. It further highlights that the system is inefficient and costly, with more than 70% of wastewater treatment work serving only 10% of the population, and that such a fragmented approach to critical infrastructure is both environmentally and financially unsustainable. Additionally, the Minister for Infrastructure has highlighted that there are around 100 areas across Northern Ireland where we're operating at near or above intended design capacity, either at the wastewater treatment works or in the sewer network, and we come back to that. Due to this lack of capacity in the water and wastewater infrastructure, this group has become increasingly frustrated, and the extent of these concerns raise very strategic decisions for these businesses, including in the most very simple of terms, whether or not to continue to build and invest in Northern Ireland, and I know my colleagues will have comment on that. The problem with the infrastructure isn't just about new homes as well. It relates to the stability of the infrastructure for supporting existing homes and commercial entities also. So it affects all capital investment in Northern Ireland. That's hotels, hospitality, retail, commercial premises, which won't be built as a result of this insufficient capacity. These problems persistently present themselves when developers begin the process of the pre-development inquiry, or PDE as it's known, with Northern Ireland Water, which is required to ensure sufficient capacity exists to support a development. This group has commissioned a piece of research undertaken by myself to quantify the impact on the Northern Ireland economy that this lack of investment is creating. Northern Ireland Water has provided me with some initial information that highlights the extent of the problems in relation to the constraints identified around the water and wastewater capacity for site development inquiries. Just to take an example, and this is a work in progress, but in 2021 alone, there were 546 pre-development inquiries or PDEs made to Northern Ireland Water, of which 68%, so that means 2 in 3, had some form of issue or constraint, particularly relating to wastewater capacity. In terms of units, those with constraints represent over 12,000 residential units and 159 commercial units that are proposed for development and for which there are constraints. While Northern Ireland does work with developers to find ways to address any issues or constraints, it is not clear how many are actually fully or even partially resolved, and we're currently working with Northern Ireland Water to understand the outworkings of this more fully, and that will feed into this research as we progress it. This obviously should be a matter of urgent concern to the Northern Ireland Executive. At this point in time, we do not fully understand the extent and impact of poor water and wastewater infrastructure in Northern Ireland, particularly in the context of the current funding requirements not being met. Members will be aware, but it's still important to note that even if NI Water is fully funded for C21, Only 49 areas will be removed from constraints, meaning that 51 areas will still be operating near or above intended design capacity, either at the wastewater treatment works or in the sewer network. This is set to be exacerbated by the fact that Northern Ireland Water has identified a further 30 economically constrained areas that may emerge during the PC21 period. Is that a fire alarm?
No, it's we're sitting, but it was.
The Deputy Speaker will take the chair in 5 minutes. The Deputy Speaker will take the chair in 5 minutes.
And apologies, I have to.
You have to take the chair.
And the deputy, goes to the deputy.
Thank you, that we're going to be evacuated. This means that there will still be at least 80 plus areas throughout Northern Ireland where constraints remain in spite of the anticipated £2.5 billion investment to support PC21. And the current constraints that will exist will not be adequately addressed in spite of the investment. So in effect, it's almost running to stand still in terms of the issues that emerge. The impact of restricted development has very significant consequences that are both tangible and intangible. The most obvious impacts are in terms of the reduction in housing supply and a reduction in investment and construction spend. And it's just important, I think, always to point out just how important construction is to the Northern Ireland economy. The sector accounts for 11% of business turnover and 10% of private sector jobs. And new housing actually accounts for about 20% of construction spend in Northern Ireland as well. So again, very significant in terms of its contribution to the economy and knock-on effects as well in terms of supply chains. In terms of housing supply, it's widely acknowledged, including by government itself, that we need more new homes. In 2019-20, new start completions were down 12% in that year alone, and they were around half of what they were pre the financial crash. The Department for Communities has recognised the gap between supply and what is needed in Northern Ireland and has recommended that at least 8,000 new homes need to be built each year. It's currently around 6,000, but that's likely to be an underestimate. There's significant knock-on consequences for reduced housing supply in the region. And obviously, one of the biggest issues, and we've seen this in terms of what's happened in the south of Ireland, restricted supply will drive up prices. And we're actually already seeing evidence of this, both in terms of house sales and rental prices in Northern Ireland as demand outstrips supply. This has obvious consequences for affordability, affecting different groups, including those in lower incomes, young people and families. It also impacts on areas, and I think this is a really important point, where supply is more restricted because of the constraints, meaning that what we actually end up with is uneven and equal sub-regional development, and it challenges the whole concept, of the executive in terms of having the right houses in the right places. And one of the attractions of Northern Ireland as a place to live is lower housing costs. The average house price in Northern Ireland is around 60% of the UK average, and for new homes that figure's 50%. If house prices are driven up because supply is choked off, then that obviously erodes one of our most important competitive advantages. Reduced housing supply, again in very simple terms, means reduced rates income for both the executive and the local government. And again, the same will apply to commercial property, and that's one of our most important sources of revenue in the executive. Fewer new homes as well present challenges in the executive's drive to the transition to sustainable homes. They represent actually a critical and arguably more achievable part of the goal towards category A energy performance. And again, just to emphasise the wider issue of the impact in terms of reduced commercial development, as you could see from the PD inquiry information, it isn't just new homes, it's a commercial and developments that are being constrained as well. And that obviously has knock-on implications for business growth and development. And interestingly, I was chatting to a business this week, and while it may be a wider issue than the water and wastewater infrastructure, there isn't simply the premises here to expand in Northern Ireland. But it also has implications for attracting inward investment as well into Northern Ireland. So the importance, in our view, of the challenges to water and wastewater infrastructure doesn't receive the attention it deserves. The Drains for Development Group encouraged the next Northern Ireland Executive to make the proper funding of water and wastewater infrastructure a priority for immediate government action. And then their key asks are that there is a provision of adequate sustainable water and wastewater infrastructure that is to be at the top of the next Executive's agenda. The complete and necessary funding of NI Water is set out in PC21 and arguably even greater, and I know James and Joe might allude to this further in terms of what's needed to actually adequately fund the system. And a well-resourced system in terms of working through the PDE process and addressing the constraints with firm timescales set for resolution. We're happy to answer any questions for the members of the committee, but first I would like to hand over to James for comment as well.
Thanks, Maureen. Yes, on behalf of Drainage for Development, I want to thank the Chair and the committee for listening today. I suppose the main point for Joe and I is that we're witnessing an unprecedented housing crisis in Northern Ireland, which we believe is going to be catastrophic. Generally, I don't believe the wider public nor the executive fully appreciate the extent of how dire this is going to be in the years to come. And our hope is that what you take away from today is that this will be a priority item on the next agenda for the next executive. We're happy to answer any and all questions.
Joe, have you anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add, no.
Look, can I begin by thanking you for coming? And obviously, I hope you find that after being in receipt of your letter, it wasn't actually requesting a committee meeting, but the committee felt that such was the seriousness of the issue that it would be prudent to have you before the committee today, because we've heard a lot from NI Water about the impact of constraints on capital funding for the provision of drainage infrastructure. But we're quite aware as a committee that very often we don't hear from the coalface, the front line, as to what your experiences are. So I suppose probably if you could, in some way, could you set out the conversations that your sector has had with government and Northern Ireland Water, and where do you see as the key pressure points going forward that if government don't address the seriousness of you've talked about a housing crisis. I think we're all witnessing that, and I think it's very, very evident what Maureen has said about that demand and supply ratio and how that's actually almost pricing people out of the market here at home as well. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on those issues.
Yeah, okay, well, I suppose best to start from a personal perspective. Fraser Houses would be probably best described as a medium-sized house builder in Northern Ireland at present, in terms of the number of units that we could build if there was no issues with wastewater capacity. You're talking about 700 homes. We put it in pre-development inquiries, as Maureen has said, to NI Water. All of them have come back with negative responses, meaning that we can only build 100 out of those 700 homes, so 85% can't be built. Generally speaking, NI Water they're willing to engage with you. They will come back and they'll suggest going forward to a solutions engineering approach, where they will assist in the way of helping deliver infrastructure. But what we're finding on the ground is that they're requesting developers to both fund, design and deliver the wastewater infrastructure upgrades. And to be honest, that feels a lot of the time is lip service is being paid, and we're actually having to go out down multiple rabbit runs to try and find solutions which just aren't there.
Yeah.
I'll maybe add that, yeah. Braidwater have been working very closely with NI Water probably up to 4 years ago when the main issue came apparent at a project in Limavady. Limavady was one of the first areas to be identified without the foul infrastructure. And I suppose as a company we try and take a problem-solving approach. We try and look at what alternatives there were, and we worked for 4 years to find alternatives, and on that particular site we've been able to do it. But the amount of effort and cost involved and the complexity can't be understated. I think if you take account of, I suppose, complexity and the modern compliance for drainage and a whole lot of different things now in the last 10 years within the constraints that NI Water have, once you dig into any particular area, there's a monumental piece of work that needs to be done in terms of modelling and understanding how good is the system, what records there are of the system, where those constraints are and what the potential solution is. So in any given area, it's very unique and very bespoke to that. And we've tried our best to be proactive in problem solving, but it's increasingly difficult.
In relation to the issue of problem solving, have NI Water asked for your assistance in terms of, for example, use of new technologies and how that might help to advance an already bleak situation? Has there been any proactive conversations like that?
Yeah, I suppose we've had experience where we've implemented new techniques. I'll give one example where we've done something called a storm offset, where last summer we went into a local grammar school, made an agreement with them to make an offset where we would take the foul, which was currently going into a combined system, rerouted it to a storm culvert, attenuated that storm, did all that work in agreement with NI Water, and that gave us capacity for a number of homes. But that would be incredibly difficult to do at scale. It only works in certain places, and I suppose what we would say is, whilst we're trying to implement new innovative techniques. There's a lot of work to be done even from an NI Water perspective in terms of how they tackle this problem, and with the resource that is applied to it alongside the funding and the approach. So I suppose funding is one aspect, but there's a whole lot more to it.
Okay. You don't have anything to add to that? No? Right. So I suppose probably that leads me on to the next question, which is, what more can your sector do you feel, to minimise the draw on drainage infrastructure? Has that been considered fully by the industry?
If you don't mind, I'll take it again. Yeah, I suppose we're always looking at every aspect of our home delivery in compliance with all the different regulations, building regulations, customer demands. Braidwater as a company also do roughly 50% social housing, so there's a lot of lifetime homes and other compliance to deal with. So we're aware of all of the different technology and innovative solutions that are there. We're always trying to apply them where we can to solve the problems. Unfortunately, this is one of many problems that the industry faces, and that the delivery of new homes doesn't rely on solving this problem alone. But we're certainly, I think as an industry, very open and in terms of taking new approaches and trying to implement new technologies.
What has been the experience of the industry in terms of dealing with NI Water as a statutory consultee? Because I can tell you privately what this committee get, it's very, very bleak. Many, in fact, some of the organisations listed in your list of those that are part of Drains for Development have told us, for example, NI Water can wait right out a consultee time and at the very end then ask for further information, further delaying it. Has this been a system that has been improving or only getting worse with current circumstances?
I think the system in general, if you have a planning approved site and you apply for an Article 161 for a connection to Foster and there's capacity there, they have streamlined that and it has become more efficient. I would say that in their favour. But anywhere where there is a wastewater capacity constraint, I mean, I know that they point to statistics for the response time on the pre-development inquiries, for example, and I think the current response time is very good, a matter of weeks. But if the response is simply to say there's no capacity, right, it's very simple to get that back. And then that's whenever as they introduce what they call their solutions engineering team, and then it's up to the developer really to take it from there. Going back to the ARDS example for my company, we know that there is no capacity for the two zonings, NS19 and NS20, which cumulatively is, I think there's about 5 different developers involved in that area, none of whom can build any homes. So whilst I'm talking about maybe 500 homes, you could add that together and suddenly there's in the region of 2,500 homes that can't be built in the greater ARDS area. The solution there, whilst all developers are responsible for the infrastructure under the ground within their own land ownership, beyond that, in third-party lands, NI Water is saying that we still have to engage with third-party landowners, which obviously leads to ransom situations. We're asking for help. Can they trigger what they call an Article 154 to put in pipes on lands that almost like a vesting type strategy? They're saying no. They're saying they're looking at it, but these are all the kind of things which we really need a lot of help on, because especially that example in the Ballyrickard wastewater treatment works, the cost that they're touting at the minute is in the region of 1.2 million, which is to be entirely met by developers. But not only are we meeting the cost, we have to get our engineers to design that. Then you present to NI Water, they can say whether they like it or don't. You go back to the drawing board, then you have to engage with those landowners in between to try and put the pipes in, and they will say, that's fine, but can I have X? And you're held to ransom, and then you can be a number of years before it's resolved. So.
I've heard of this experience, and I think it's very unfair, in fact, that a third party can hold at ransom a wider development of an area which could bring not only rates income from a local borough, but also homes for people, real tangible homes. And I think that's sad. And which also someone has levelled the criticism at NI Water that this is a deliberate tactic in order to create more of a bottleneck to force more pressure on government for more funding. Is there any evidence of that things have got more difficult because there is a game of ping pong, as I should say, between Northern Ireland Water and indeed the wider political situation to gain more funding and therefore affecting development? Absolutely.
I mean, I think it wouldn't be fair for me to sit today and say that I have evidence of it, but we, as a result of being told that there's no capacity for any homes, we obviously did commissioned our own engineering reports, which suggest the complete opposite. I mean, that application for our third phase of development in Newtonards for 450 homes. We're being told by our own consultants that there's capacity for all of them. So we're now, I mean, I would say, estimate we spent tens of thousands putting flow meters under the ground, lifting manholes to check what is actually the situation. And I have colleagues in the industry who if they were sitting here today, could prove that those challenges to NI Water have been successful. So yes, there's definitely a suspicion that they're towing a company line of make sure every PDE gets a no capacity response, because that will force the executive's hand to increase the funding.
It's certainly something that this committee could maybe ask for, because that would concern many of us if there is a deliberate tactic, because in effect it's affecting homeowners. Finally, obviously, we have a large collection of developers coming together here, which represent a large section of the developers across Northern Ireland, so a lot of homes involved here. How bleak is the situation? So obviously some of these home builders have actually already... Pardon, George? Some of these home builders have indicated that they're no longer going to build in Northern Ireland because of the situation. So how bleak is the situation that they face in terms of this bottleneck?
Well, I'll let Joe come in, but I'll before that I would just say that we've had to completely alter our 5 to 10 year plan specifically because of NI Water constraints and nothing else. We're, for continuity of work, about 100 men on site is purely reliant on a small site in Killinchie that's coming up, and then another small one in Carryduff, and beyond that there is no immediate future for Fraser houses in Northern Ireland to build. So yes, I'd be lying if I said we're not looking to the Republic, and I know that all of us in the consortium are looking at the mainland United Kingdom, which, as Maureen has pointed out, will result in a huge loss of inward investment to Northern Ireland.
If I'll just add, sorry, add that. As I said before, this is one piece of the jigsaw. We can foresee that a lot of the projects that we're currently building came to fruition in area plans that are 30 years old. If we take account of the current area plans and apply the new levels of compliance in the modern world, it'll be 40 years before some of those are delivered. There's a lack of understanding of the complexity in delivering any homes in Northern Ireland. There's a monumental challenge on most sites to get them on the ground. Sometimes we'd say the building is the easy part. The actual building on the ground is the easy part. It's everything it takes to get it there. And there's a frustration, an increasing frustration on all the builders in the group that's why they have to start looking further afield. I'll add to that we haven't actually studied it, but if we look at the number of small, medium and large house builders in Northern Ireland, in the last number of years, especially since the recession, they are in decline. And the main reason I would say for that is that the constraints and the barriers there, from financial to compliance, technical understanding, are increasing by the day, literally by the day. That is going to have a long-term impact on the ability to deliver affordable homes. We would say that as a region, we're probably one of the most affordable areas to deliver homes at the minute. We're one of the highest quality areas of homes being delivered in terms of size and actual quality of home delivered, versus South Ireland or in England or Scotland, for example. And we're going to lose that. That's where we see it.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to members now. David Hillis, Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, and you're very welcome, folks, this morning. Good to see you here and giving your case over. Maureen, you did say that in your opinion there's not enough attention on the issue itself, but maybe to reassure you that inside these four walls there's a lot of attention, and there's constantly questions being asked of ministers as to how they're trying to deal with this matter. So don't think that it's totally being ignored, but there is a frustration, as you say too, you know. You did mention obviously the mainland there, potentially maybe like Scotland and Wales and maybe the Republic and that, but how does the frustrations that we have here in Northern Ireland bearing out? How does that? You've looked at obviously the mainland, at least anyway, and is there a similar problem coming there, or have they dealt with that? Is there an issue on mainland that's comparable, or are we isolated and we're out of step with everybody else? Basically, is that?
Well, I suppose as a company we had an office and a house building arm in the northwest of England up to the recession. We have a bit of experience in it, and we've done some work there since. So our understanding there is that across the house building industry, the constraints are certainly less, from planning right through to infrastructure delivery, and that the infrastructure set up particularly with reference to water and drainage, is totally different to here, totally different in terms of how it's funded. And yes, I'm sure they have problems, but they're certainly not facing the challenges that we face at the minute.
Now, maybe the committee could have a wee look at that, maybe do a bit of research on that too, just to see if there's anything that could help us out here in Northern Ireland. In your opinion then, if it was all singing, all dancing, and the block grant allowed the money to be set aside for this specific issue, is the department ready to move on it in your opinion, or is it going to be like other issues on the Department of Infrastructure? It'll take another 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years to get it on the ground. If there was a quick solution, are they ready in your opinion, or is there going to be another gap?
I believe that there is a certain amount of readiness in terms of the planning that's been done, in terms of what needs to be done, what the priorities are. The only thing I would add is that because of cost increases in the industry or across everything at the minute, and inflation, there will be further challenges. You know, as I said before, resources, the ability to deliver on the ground, there will be more challenges. This is the start of it, as opposed to being a simple pouring money and it'll work, you know.
That again, something maybe the committee can take up with the department. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Cathal Boylan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and you are very welcome. And I mean, these are the rooms you need to be in. And I mean, I would agree with the previous members. I mean, a lot of us have sat here and we've we went through the planning process. But primarily for yourselves, I mean, we know it's a huge issue. We know we need major investment in wastewater, and we know what building homes can do and grow the economy and all of those sides of things. So we're on your side, and I mean, it is a priority for us. But you know, the NIW's, what is it? No drains, no cranes is their mantra, and I appreciate that. But I just want to get a better feeling for how it's impacting yourselves, in light of what you've said about moving across, you know, going to England or going down south or anything else, because clearly there's a need here for development here, besides the economy growth and everything else, recovery from COVID and everything else. How it's impacting actually on your membership. Just want to get a wee feel for that first, and businesses, so that you are associated with. How do you feel that's impacting, or can you give a detail in relation to that?
You mean beyond the residential side?
Yeah, right across, even associated businesses, you know, at the minute, and suppliers and everything else, but in the building trade, your members and everything else, how is if you don't get building these, the impact that's going to have on it?
It's a good question. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about outside of the immediate industry. I don't even know, you know, merchants visit our sites all the time, and they'll ask, you know, new sites coming up, or where are you next? You tell them about what's going on with wastewater infrastructure, and they're clueless. No one really knows, because I don't think it gets enough attention in the media necessarily, although MCE have done a great job, our PR team, in trying to bring it into the news media. But yes, of course, it'd be catastrophic for anybody who's involved in supplying the building trades, anyone in the wider industry. And we haven't even really touched on commercial, retail, hospitality today. I was in a meeting with a planning consultant a couple of weeks ago about a restaurant entrepreneur from Glasgow. You may be familiar with the 6 Pound Eco restaurant in Belfast, and it's done very well. He wanted to set up a new premises, put in a PDE for it, and was told, no, you can't get a fire sewer connection. So what's he going to do? Take his business elsewhere, not in Northern Ireland. And that's just one small restaurateur example. You know, there'll be countless examples of that. And maybe it only hits the headlines whenever it's a tech company or somebody large that comes in and gets told you can't build in Belfast.
If I could just even come in on that, interestingly, I know that some of the builders merchants are starting to express a real interest in this because of the knock-on effects to them, and they're actually starting to see the tangible impacts of it. And what I would say is the construction sector has one of the largest multipliers in Northern Ireland in terms of its wider impacts, both in terms of local suppliers and the wages that are spent. So there's a multiplier of around 2 if you include both the indirect and the induced effects from the construction spend. So I say the knock-on effects in terms of the implications of this going forward are significant, not just for the sector, but so for every job that's created, there's another job supported basically by the sector, and so the knock-on consequences are significant in that respect.
And just in terms of the construction industry itself, obviously, like I said, COVID recovery, we're trying to, you know, rebuild the economy. The impact, the potential impact it has in it, because you've said you're in for 500 houses, you only build 100. I mean, clearly, even in the construction, that's going to have a major impact. And you want to speak a wee bit about that, or the potential in terms of employment and all of those things?
Well, just to give an example, I suppose, in our team, we've built our planning and technical team, which historically we didn't have. We would outsourced to consultants, and that would have been good enough. Now we have an in-house team of about 6 people that are focused on all the challenges from planning right through to these NI water issues and trying to solve the problems. If you apply then our consultants, we're employing more and more consultants to look at more and more problems, and the resource isn't even there from a skills-based perspective to do that, and that has a knock-on effect in the ability to deliver anything. So there's a lot of hidden consequences on top of the, the headline stuff, and that again just builds and builds on that frustration of the inability to deliver, the cost impact on running a business here at the minute with all the challenges that are coming at us, and that then has an impact on what do we do to keep the jobs? What do we do to keep our head office jobs? We have no choice but to look to alternatives, and that's why a lot of builders are saying we need to look at different areas because this just is not working.
No, and I'm trying to tease that all out because that's a major issue for us right across the board in terms of as the executive as well. So, just another point, Warren, because I think you touched, because we're keen to get the wastewater infrastructure in a balanced way right across where they need it. Give everybody a fair crack of the whip. And you've said was 49 and 51 miss out in terms of the PC. So just how are those areas going to suffer? And I know you're primarily because you're in Armagh, I'm sure, and you could throw in might as well throw in the area plans as well, because each area plan has identified so many units and I know they're nowhere near the area plans, not be here for maybe 10 years, but you have to go on ahead with what's there. So my point is in terms of trying to get that balanced approach right across the north. Would you like to speak a wee bit about that?
I think one of the things that, in terms of trying to get this work underway, I think what I would answer to that is it's not clearly enough understood what the sub-regional impacts are. So we've got kind of top-level information around the PDE constraints, but we don't know what the resolution of those are, so we don't know how that actually filters out in terms of the geographical spread of what gets built and what doesn't. And hopefully, through this journey with Drains for Development and working with Northern Ireland, we'd be able to understand that better. But it does really challenge the whole concept of, everybody loves the expression levelling up at the moment. It's everywhere, and it really does challenge the whole concept of levelling up. Even how you develop cities, how you develop communities, how you spread impact, and even in terms of hybrid working, for example. If you're going to try and encourage more people to work, in a more sub-regional basis, and I know the executive have the hubs kind of focus, then how do you do that if you can't let people live where they want to live? Within obviously you can't. Obviously you have to have certain constraints on that because the system can't cope with everyone, but it should be able to cope. It should be designed in a way that meets the strategic objectives of the executive. Then that's from the programme for government down.
Oh, and just a final point, and thanks, Chair, for the time. Clearly it's a broader discussion, and we're having a good discussion. Rather than, it's not as simple as questions and answers, but we're trying to get everything in the open here to see exactly what's going on. My final point, and it is key, because PC21, in terms of utility regulator and the 2 billion, right, and we've talked about the 51-49%, right, we would be keen to see exactly where that's at, and the Chair's already asked, because if you're saying out there that there is capacity in some areas for the build, that's something we would be keen as a committee to find out exactly, because there's questions has to be asked about that. If you can develop 250 out of those 500, instead of being saying there's capacity for 100, that's the kind of conversation we need to have.
It's very important. One thing that we can't really get our head around is why NI Water can't tell us what catchments they'll be focused on and when, because you don't want to go in. Another alternative we haven't spoken about, Joe spoke about stormwater offsetting, is to build your own wastewater treatment plant on site at huge cost, which NI Water nor NIEA like. But if you were to go ahead and do that to the tune of £500,000, then there's no opportunity to go back and recoup those funds in future if you were to get a connection. So you might invest that and then find out potentially 2 weeks later, oh no, the Capital Works programme for NI Water is going to go ahead and upgrade the infrastructure, and you never needed to spend that money. Or a year later after finishing development. So we've asked them surely they need to give us the priority areas, which catchments are going to be focused on and when. And as it stands, I have no idea when that is.
I think that's a very good point. I think it's almost like a shadowy sort of system at the moment,
We need
whereby if NI Water can almost catch a builder on the particular wastewater treatment plant, albeit the better for them. I think there needs to be a much more transparency and a collaborative working approach to ensure that we can sort of, again, as Cathal says, if there is an ability, and your own consultants are telling you that may not be the totality, but there is certainly ability, rather than drag everything to a halt, we as a committee need to know and be confident in the fact that there's a collaborative approach by both NI Water, the department, and home builders to ensure that we can ensure that things don't drag completely to a halt, which seems to be becoming more likely as we're going towards a more of a bottleneck.
And Chair, it's important because those units that you build for a temporary period, they're going to have to be adapted at some point going forward in the future, which is more likely NIW because you know what I mean. So, but listen, thanks very much for.
I think it's fair to say that clarity would be useful if we're trying to solve problems. If we have a clear understanding of what can and can't be done, then we have a chance of solving the problem collectively.
Fair enough.
Okay, Liz Kimmins, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all for the briefing this morning. It's definitely been very interesting, and like Cathal had said, we both represent Newry Armagh. It's probably one of the biggest issues that we get in terms of development and the delays and halt it puts to a lot of development. I mean, just the conversation we're having there just before I come in, an issue I've been dealing with was a man was trying to build one house within a already existing development and was quoted £25,000 to be able to get a connection to the system. So, I mean, the issues you've raised are quite concerning. Around 68% of the pre-development inquiries having some form of issue constraint, and I think that's pretty stark. So I think that it is important that we do get clarity around that. Where are the issues, and also to see how many of those have been resolved. So I was just wondering, have you had any sort of engagement on NI Water to see how many have been resolved? I mean, certainly that's something we should be easy to ascertain.
Thank you, Chair. We have been trying to work with NI Water to understand that better, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think it's entirely simple from their perspective because, a PDE can be submitted for the same site over a number of years, so it can be difficult to track. But I suppose what I would say is that there actually isn't an easy answer to this because we would have gotten it by now, and what we're actually having to do with Northern Ireland Water is to break it down into just looking at a certain period of time and then trying to understand what the workings of that have been in terms of whether or not development has proceeded. But I suppose in simple terms the information isn't available, and that's something we're trying to work with them to try and understand better.
And maybe that's something that the committee could help with as well. I know, Chair, you had mentioned other things earlier, so it's something we should maybe be looking at as well. Just two final questions, I suppose, to kind of get to the nitty gritty of it. Have NI Water indicated how long the PDE process takes, typically? And I mean, have you had the opportunity to even compare the PDE process here in the north with any other areas, such as the south of Ireland or other jurisdictions, that maybe we could look at learning lessons that way and looking at other practice?
Again, no, we wouldn't have that information doesn't appear to be available, and it's something that, as I said, the only way I think we can get to is probably take a certain proportion of PDEs and try and understand where they ended up, but there is no consistent measurement of the output over time, because a PDE, you could have X number of PDEs for the same site, is my understanding of the way it is at the moment. So it's not as if you're given a number and that's tracked through then to find out what the end outcome is. It's applied for over maybe multiple time periods, so it's difficult to understand then what happens at the end. On the point on the other jurisdictions, we haven't looked at it as yet because, to be perfectly honest, we've been trying to get to the bottom of this one in the first place, so it's something that we could look at down the line, but I think our focus has been trying to work this, the immediate issue of Northern Ireland out in the first instance.
Sorry, Chair, I would just add to that, Maureen, the PDE process is now much more streamlined, but as I say, you might get a response within 3 weeks. If that response is simply there's insufficient capacity to serve this proposal, it's easy to turn those out. There's no backup to that. There's no you can get X, so we will facilitate 25% of your application. It's just a simple, there is no capacity. And then you start to engage with the solutions engineering, which I've explained before. And that's where you get to that bottleneck again. So.
Yeah, just on that point, James, that's kind of the issue that the example I gave. Once I had engaged with NI Water on it, we're now trying to work through it without that cost being involved. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that there's possibly it's a holding line, but I think we need to work through it and find what the potential solutions are. Chair, that's me. Thanks very much. Thank you for your responses.
Sorry, can I just add one thing there? Yep. There is an additional layer, which is something called a network capacity check, where then you can apply for that, and there's some more work done to understand the system, what capacity is available. Again, that's down to a lot of unique traits within that area, and we don't have a clear understanding of how that works, but there is another process as well.
Okay, Patrick Delargy.
Thanks firstly for the presentation. I suppose I wanted to speak a wee bit about my own constituency in Derry. It's shocked me as a relatively new MLA how much the impact of wastewater is having on building homes. Obviously, we have a plan, that Deirdre Hargey's brought forward in the communities to build 100,000 homes over the next 15 years. And to do that, we need other departments to get on board, because as you say, and just to echo what David had said as well, that will is there. And I think that understanding is quite cross-cutting across a lot of the parties. I would be confident in saying that. But there are huge issues. I have been shocked by the number of developers who have come to me in Derry and have flagged this up as a huge issue. I've also flagged up roads, and I have to say that in any of my communication with NI Water, I have found them to be very abrasive, and I found that change to be quite. I'm not seeing it. So you have stated that NI Water have worked with developers to try and find ways to address that and these constraints. So if you could comment any further, I know you have already, but maybe to elaborate on the current process and the developer's relationship with NI Water when trying to resolve these issues.
I'll maybe just throw a bit of local context there. So since our work in Limavady, where we tried option ABC, we've finally got an outcome with the storm offset, which has been successful despite the challenges. We're applying that to other projects now, and now that we understand it more and we have a team that are set up to do it, but we're, I suppose, luckily enough that we're at a scale that we can do that, and not everybody has that team and not everybody has that resource. And the scale of some of our projects, if you know, the H2 project is significant. So we are confident that we will get a solution there. We're very close to getting a solution, working closely with NI Water to get it. And I suppose I would certainly say we are making progress on certain fronts. Not all fronts, but on certain fronts. But as I say, there are a lot of other builders that wouldn't have that resource, and we're fortunate in that.
Yeah, I would just add that we don't have the in-house resource, so we're employing consultant engineers to do that work on our behalf. Another example I can give alongside two adjacent developers in the Carryduff area is we're looking at stormwater offsetting, as Joe has done, and every rabbit hole we've gone down has shown up with nothing. NI Water, to be fair, it took 12 months, but we did get a report on suggestions of where we could identify stormwater offsetting options, but all of them came to nothing. And again, tens of thousands were spent on that. There's another option now that we privately identified that we think may work, but the process tends to be we go to NI Water, suggest something, they'll take quite a serious amount of time to look at it, come back and say it doesn't work, kind of thing. Whereas what I would like to see is a more proactive, collaborative approach from NI Water, a dedicated engineer that you could lift the phone to and say, will you work alongside our consultant engineers? Because at the minute it's just very much private sector led with no assistance.
Yeah, it sounds, from everything that you've said, like an extremely frustrating process, and it really rules out anyone who doesn't have that resource from even applying in the first place. Just one final question. A note there that you'd called for an adequately resourced system of working through the PDE process and addressing those constraints with firm time scales set for the resolution. So how exactly would you want to see that process improved?
Well, I suppose as much transparency as possible, number one. There is a dedicated team set up within iWater now to deal with some of these challenges, so as much resource that can be afforded to them as possible again, and whatever funding is required to do it. I think that if somebody took the time to weigh up the infrastructure investment versus the investment in resource within iWater for problem solving and assisting developers, there's certainly a lot of short-term gains could be had by the latter. That would be my suggestions.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. We now go to Cara Hunter, please, for a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel. Apologies you can't see me. I've had a number of issues with our broadcasting app, Starleaf, so apologies for that. But listen, I just wanted to thank you all for your briefing here this morning and to reassure your concerns are definitely being heard. I don't really have a question as such, as they've been mentioned by previous members around what other regions do to tackle this problem and to find solutions. But I found this morning's discussion helpful, detailed, and I know, as mentioned in the pack as well, the Minister has highlighted about the 100 areas across the north operating near or above intended design capacity. So it's definitely being acknowledged. And I acknowledge as well, it is good to see you're working closely with iWater. And I think Maureen had touched on there the importance of expansion and growth. And I think that is something that we all want to see and recognise the importance of the correct infrastructure to do that. But moving forward, just to reassure you, I think we as a committee will be doing all we can to find solutions. And I know that difficulties with uncertainty around future funding and historic underinvestment have caused a number of issues, but I think we as a committee are keen to get this resolved. Thank you.
I know that was comments, so we will go to George Robinson and then we'll come back to you. So George, do you want to put your question?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the presentation as well. I know Braidwater official has mentioned Limavady, which I am a Limavady man through and through, so I want to make sure that I support people like Braidwater. That's what I was put here for. But in the Limavady area, we have been told we've made numerous soundings to the department, and they tell us that it'll take somewhere in the region of about 2 million to bring the water and sewage situation and capacity up to speed. And I have great sympathy for people like Braidwater, who has done a very good job now, particularly with the recent development that they had, or they built up the Ballycbun Road. But this definitely has got a knock-on effect particularly for social housing in the area. And there's a large waiting list, and the sooner we get this resolved, the better. But as I say, I have great sympathy for firms like Braidwater, who have done a brilliant job in the Limavady area, trying to supply houses, social housing, and other housing as well. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'll just add to that. Again, we would see ourselves as fortunate. We're one of a number of builders that's able to deliver homes today, and others can't. The short-term solutions that we've found are only short-term, and without the next stage of investment, nobody will be able to move forward, including ourselves. So.
Okay, well, I know those were two general comments at the end, but could I ask, so just two final questions, which are probably more direct, but so given limited funding, what are the priority areas, either geographical areas of sectoral areas, housing, etc.? Is there any priority areas that, you know, that if there could be a sort of sectoral sort of move on this, where you see that? It's maybe a wider question, you know.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I suppose each developer could answer this selfishly.
Yes, everyone's
just all in
which is fair enough. You're here.
I know that Living with Water programme is focusing on the Greater Belfast area anyway, and I suppose that is the concern, that Belfast will see the priority funding and that the rest of the boroughs will suffer. So, look, it needs to be as equal and fair as possible without anybody having to take the thick end of it. You know.
Yeah, and finally,
could I just say, Chair, I think that's where the housing supply consultation at the moment, you know, how critical it is, and if you actually look at that, there's very, very scant reference to water and wastewater infrastructure. in that strategy. So there really needs to be much more emphasis placed. I know from even speaking to Northern Ireland Water, the PDE process comes arguably before planning. So while planning is a major issue, you know, that in itself, the PDE process needs to be given greater consideration in terms of the housing supply strategy report.
And I know there is, in this next question, there is a lot of different opinions, so if you don't feel you want to ask or answer, that there's no problem with that. But does the sector have a distinct view on the funding mechanisms going forward for both drainage and water in Northern Ireland? That's a hugely political question, I understand, but I'd be interested to know if there was a collective viewpoint from the sector. There may not be.
I suppose I have a personal view, which isn't a sector view. Our personal view on anything that we deal with as a small ordinary business is be pragmatic. And when you've ruled out A, B, C and you're left only with D, whatever D is, you have to go for it. And I suppose I don't think it's any different for anybody here or anybody that's applying a budget across the country. You have to look at your options, you have to look at your best return on investment, and you take whatever's left or what the best judgment that you can possibly make. So that sometimes involves making hard decisions that people don't like, but unfortunately we don't have much choice if we want to remain a business, so that's what we have to do. So I suppose what we would ask for as from a political perspective is, if you have to make a hard decision and it goes against what maybe people, the public might like, sometimes you have to stand up and do it.
Yeah. Any other opinions on that?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think there is a go-between. You know, I know that within these walls, water charges is not going to be a very popular decision for any MLA, but the funding structure of NI Water as it stands is far too rigid. So facilitating some form of private sector borrowing, allowing them to access additional funds, because even if the 2.1 billion is secured, the way that is drip fed to NI Water year on year isn't sufficient to deal with the catchments that we're talking about. So yeah, a change in legislation to allow that.
Yeah. We did actually fully make comment on that from a committee's perspective at the budget debate, as the piecemeal approach in terms of NI Water surviving to each monetary round, and it's not sustainable in that format, and that's on the record from the committee. Cathal, do you have a point?
Yeah, Chair, because it's important. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, James, and there's political, discord over that. But the issue is simple. I mean, unless there's discussion, we brought this up as part of the review of the Planning Act, because NIE and NIW are major statutory consultees, and unless we get all that right, there's nothing being right. So whilst we agree with the 2.1 billion, which we do support, we need to tie all those things together. When you're in the room, you can't be saying we'll give the developer 500 houses without the capacity. You mean it's like giving you a bale of blocks and nobody to build them. You know what I mean?
That's it.
So let's be realistic about it. And I agree with it. That's fair enough point you made there. But we need to get in the room. The discussion today is bringing it back to us. That's what we need to go back to. Because 2.1 billion, even if we give 4.1 billion, because it's the balance, where do we get it right? So there's no area plans. HE is going to a different area and get development for 200 houses or whatever it is. The capacity is not there right across the board. And we need to sort all of that out, to be honest. And that's where I see part of the issue as well. So, I mean, appreciate the discussion Chair's brought up some food for thought, and we're certainly on your side in this and here, and we'll try and support it.
Have Drains for Development had the opportunity to meet with the Minister and the Department, or indeed with NIW as a collective?
Not as a collective, no.
No.
I think the Federation, we've met with NI Water, so
yeah.
they'll attend the private housing committee meetings now and again, but never with
okay.
infrastructure.
I think it would be good for an action point for the committee as well, for us to encourage both the department and NI Water to meet with the collective group, given the number of developers that are involved with this. I think it would be important. Okay, with that, can I thank you all very much for coming to the committee this morning. That's certainly been very useful for us, and indeed also we have a number of takeaway points there that we will be feeding back through to the department. But we appreciate your time, and indeed we certainly sympathise with the situation that many of you now find yourselves in through no fault of your own. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Cheers.
Okay, members, we will make comment on this in a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, all right.
Okay, members, obviously we had a number of action points contained within the briefing. I seen Jim scribbling, so I imagine we have those noted down. There's certainly a list of questions there that I think we have to explore with the department. Members are content with you. Obviously, you raised different questions throughout that, and we can ensure that that list is put through to the department as soon as possible.
George, it's interesting if there's developers out there that have an independent opinion about capacity.
Yeah.
We're getting a different opinion.
See, yeah.
You know, there's a question mark. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but let's ask the question.
Well, this is my fear as well, that we are literally. It's a bit like at the time, if you remember the briefing session regarding the January monitoring round and the situation that certain aspects of the department found themselves in. I think if it is the case, and I'm not saying it is because we need the evidence, but if it is a case whereby NIW are holding back completely on schemes to make a political point in relation to funding, and the capacity issue in which the independent consultants are identifying, if they're not adding up, I think we do need answers on that, because certainly it is exacerbating an already difficult situation. So I think we can ask those questions. I think that's certainly something that we can in terms of the assessments that are carried out for capacity issues. Is there a point of discussion or deliberation between both developer and NI Water in terms of what actually is the capacity and how is that verified? I think that would be an important angle. Members are content with yes.
Can I just say there? I would entirely disagree with the fact that this has anything to do with politics. I kind of resent the fact that you would believe that our minister would hold back funding for this matter based on politics as opposed to perhaps a policy issue. So just I would not like to associate myself with those comments. Thank you.
Okay, but I just want to put on record, Cara, I'm not in any way accusing the minister of anything. I'm saying that a long-established practice that has been identified, and the accusation has been made from developers, that capacity in which they have identified and which NI Water are identifying are at odds. My question simply from the committee is that we identify how the verification process actually is carried out, and if there is a differential, how can that be resolved? I hope that maybe clarifies to you that it's in no way pointing a finger at a minister. In fact, I don't think I've mentioned the minister in any of my comments today. So it's just to put that on record in relation. Are members broadly content with what I'm suggesting? Yeah. I think we got the thrust of the discussion. Yeah? Okay, members. Is there any other particulars that members want to ensure that's asked of the department whenever we're going back?
No.
Sure, what I can do is, I mean, a lot of these may be in the form of a statement and ask for views, along with the questions that members said, but I can send out an email around those past members, so if there's anything then that they want to add, then that can be done.
Yeah, and I think also encouraging the conversation between both Drains for Development and indeed NI Water and indeed the department will be certainly something that will be helpful, because I think what we've seen today was a plea for this be pragmatic and this try to find solutions, because I think nobody's winning at the moment with the stalemate in relation to NI Water and development.
No, Chair, I'm glad you clarified the point, because we're not saying we agreed with the PC21 on the support for NIW. What we're hearing today is an alternative opinion on what the capacity, and we're only asking the question for clarity. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, members, thank you. We will now go to agenda item number 14, which is the forward work programme. Can I draw members' attention to the proposed draft work programme at page 190? Is
that it? 2 meetings left? No.
Yep, we're getting we're getting low now. So if members have anything particularly that they want included in a briefing session, because I do see in the 16th in particular we just one briefing session. That may be enough, but if members have any solutions in the interim,
maybe you take us out for lunch and all. So.
Well, that's right. We'll have our closing lunch. Okay. Members, I've no other comments on the forward work programme, so we go now to agenda item number 15, which is any other business. Does any member have any other items of business they wish to raise? No. Members content. Okay, members. Agenda item number 16, which is date, time and location of next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 9th of March 2022 in room 29 Parliament Buildings. And with that, I would adjourn the meeting and thank members for their time this morning. Thank you.
Chair.
Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is